what I'd like to do is explain the difference between brand PR, because it is quite confusing. And I've been in the business for about 10 years, and it took me a while to actually get it. If you think about brand, it's very much sort of the way the brand looks. So the logo, the visual identity. If you think about the brand, it's just imagining a person. What do they look like? How do they talk, walk, and what is their value system? So that's what I mean by brand. When we look at marketing and communications, that's really focused predominantly on the buyer. So it's a very commercial focused communication. So it's really to support sales. When you look at public relations, it is really actually much, I personally find it much more interesting because it's across a spectrum of stakeholders. So it's not just the buyer, but it's also the employees. It's also the community, it's government, it's journalists. So it's much more wider, the communication. So it's more complex. So now if we get back to how can we be strategic in our approach to brand marketing and PR during this time? And what I'd like to do is break it down into 3 different areas. The first area is to survive. The second is to revive, which really is to take information in, figure out a bit of a strategy. And then the third area is to thrive in this new world that we find ourselves in. Now, if we focus on survive, first of all, now, when this obviously happened, and we've been a couple of months into this now, so we're kind of coming out of survival mode, but what happens typically in survival is people focus upon cash flow, liquidity, and the first thing they do is just cut all costs. And of course, that is important, especially when you're uncertain in terms of the income coming in. But Harvard Business Review did a really interesting study, and they analyzed businesses after the economic crash. In 2008, and they analyzed businesses to see actually what strategy works after a crisis. Is the strategy of cutting all costs work, or is the strategy of actually investing lots of money for the future work? And what they found is the companies that cut all costs, it didn't work well for them. The companies that actually did a huge investment, it didn't work well for them. But those who took a bit of an in-between approach, those were the ones that actually did well. So when you're in survival mode and you're hit with a crisis, it's very important not to take a knee-jerk reaction, nor be rose-tinted about the future. So it's a little bit like the Goldilocks principle, where, not too hot, not too cold, in terms of the porridge, not too big or not too small in terms of the bed. So taking a middle way is really important. So in survival mode, your first instinct, is very fear-based. So it's very like, oh my God, this is going to last forever. My business is ruined. So it's important not to make your decisions from fear, but to make your decisions in terms of marketing and PR from a place of being able to be strategic and understand the future of what's coming. And in survival mode, what that means is to really understand the changes that are here. You have to group them into buckets. So bucket number 1, is it a temporary change? Bucket number 2, is it actually a permanent change? Or bucket number 3, is it a pre-existing trend that has been accelerated by coronavirus? So I'll give you an example. Events. This conference we're taking place at the moment is all digital. Now, digital conferences was actually a pre-existing trend, but it's been accelerated by the coronavirus. So all of a sudden, some of us who have been doing the odd webinar now all of a sudden are doing dozens a week. And so what's going to happen after all of the lockdown measures are relaxed? Are we still going to have it? Yeah. Does that mean that live events will never take place again? No. So that is an example of a trend that has become, that's basically, it was pre-existing, but it's been accelerated. So it would normally take, 5 to 10 years of human behavior to have changed to get to the position where people are all using webinars and digital conferences. But because of the coronavirus, it's happened within a couple of months. So really analyze the behavior of people to understand temporary, permanent, or pre-existing trend that has just been accelerated. Now, also in terms of survival, it's important to note that when you are a brand and you're consumer facing, it's really a time where people are scared. And so it's the time to look for opportunity, but not be opportunistic. And what that means is people are scared and people are vulnerable. So during survival phases, such as what happened with, a couple of months ago when this first of all initially hit us. And this, crises will continue in the future. So it's important to learn for the future is when something like this happens, the public do not want to see any business as taking opportunities in a highly profit-seeking motive. So I'll give you an example. There were brands who were doubling the cost of say a hand sanitizer or masks or PPE and etc. And they were really publicly shamed, and there's huge reputational damage. There were businesses like Beckham, her fashion business, Victoria Beckham. She decided to furlough staff and use government funds, and then there was a huge backlash, and then she retreated against that because the thought was actually if you've got enough money, you shouldn't really be using a lot of public health, a lot of public expenditure to bolster your own business. So people all of a sudden became somewhat moralistic, and they had an ethical lens on when they were looking at brands to see how are they behaving. Are they behaving in a way that is just looking for opportunities, or are they behaving in a way that is quite ethical? And so during survival mode, your stakeholders would be really looking at you to see, are you giving back? Are you trying to help society? Are you trying to help the most vulnerable people? So the brands and companies that did well were really the fitness instructors that actually although we're charging for their digital sessions, they were giving the odd free ones as well. They were people who were giving, even like the FT, for instance, normally it's very expensive to attend their conferences. They were like, what, there's people out there that can't afford it. People are losing their jobs. We're going to give some conferences for free. So they didn't give all of them for free, but they gave part of it for free. So what you see in survival mode is the brands that do quite well, and be it a personal brand, if you're a one-man person, as a psychotherapist, or you're a big company brand, during survival mode, it's really important to be seen as being more giving, caring, and showing empathy, and not looking for chasing huge amounts of profits when people are suffering. And one would say that's quite simple and straightforward, but you'd be surprised in terms of the companies that are out there making the wrong sort of decisions in terms of how to communicate. So really survival mode, just focus upon being, the human side of your brand, looking to help, looking to be, and to have empathy. Now, the second part is actually revive. Now, revive is when you're coming out of survival mode, which is kind of where we are at the moment, because we've had 2 months of freaking out. I mean, I don't know about you, but it was pretty scary what we've all gone through. And but now we're coming out, and now is the time to really be strategic and really think to yourself, okay, now I kind of understand the stuff that is temporary, permanent, accelerated. What is my business or my sector going to look like in the future? And and crisis situations such as COVID is a time for reckoning. But it's also a time for reinvention. It's also a time that we should actually connect to purpose and to really rethink our business model, rethink our life, rethink the way we want to communicate with our stakeholders. Because what I found is businesses that really prioritize their employees rather than just their profit and loss accounts, they've built so much credit and goodwill that's going to actually help them in the future. So during this second phase of revive, really, be entrepreneurial and think to yourself, actually, I don't just have to go in tunnel vision. Now is the time I can be a little bit bold. I can look into actually opening up a new service or slightly changing a service. So for instance, I was working in public relations, we would always do traditional events. We've never done digital events for our clients. And all of a sudden, this was our opportunity to think, what? In the future, there's still going to be live events, but actually it will probably run in parallel with the opportunity for people to digitally tune in. Especially as we know with coronavirus, it actually affects people in different ways. So perhaps people who are elderly or who have underlying health issues may not wish to travel and attend an event. So there may even be a bit of a sort of a demographic divide. So therefore, when you do events, even live events, it may be a good idea to hold them in conjunction with each other, not choose one or the other, but actually do both, and then therefore becoming much more inclusive. So I think we've taken that opportunity to now look into doing digital. We also took the opportunity as a business to think to ourselves, right, there's going to be some people that we want to connect with, but they may not want to sort of physically immerse themselves into an event. How else can we reach them? So obviously the explosion of audio, podcasts, huge, doing these sort of webinars, but then extracting the audio from the webinar and putting it in a podcast. Because what's happening in terms of communications is people are really looking to consume content in multi-channels. So really not choosing one or the other, but giving people a real selection of channels that you can choose. So, pushing your messages into all areas such as events, live and digital, podcasts, webinars, videos. And in this time when we are physically separated from each other, it's so important for that sort of human element. And so if you can communicate using a short video, that is going to be much more impactful and effective than sending somebody a boring 17-page PDF. So I think the other thing about Revive is we do have a bit more time in our hands because we're not going out in the evening, we're not traveling, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is the time also to do some research. And there's actually amazing courses that's on Coursera, on edX. You've got Harvard and Stanford giving courses for free, How To Academy giving courses for free, where you can actually learn a lot more about storytelling, which is fundamentally the sort of the core DNA of brand marketing, public relations. And as humans, storytelling is the most effective way to really influence and change behaviors and connect with people, because we are actually storytelling animals. But also understand that we are a world that's increasingly globalized and we are increasingly connected. And the fact is that crisis is only going to continue. So but living in a world where there'll be numerous crises, one after the other, from geopolitical to environmental to sort of virus pandemics to economic, there will be crisis. And the important thing is not to freak out about it, but to actually embrace it in the sense of embracing agility. And what that means is not to build castles on quicksand, but actually to build your business and build your brand in a way that you can be agile and responsive if and when crisis is, or forget if, when crisis comes your way, because it will. And what do you do about that? So, for instance, a year before this happened, our team went working remote. So, working from home as an option, everything obviously to be digitalized, but also to understand, to build that level of agility. So even when you enter into sort of contracts with, marketing, PR agencies and so forth, instead of putting yourself in for a long-term, 3-month notice, etc., you really need that agility in your contractual obligations, in your financial obligations, that if and when a crisis comes, you can move quickly and also you can change direction. Also, in terms of being able to thrive, is that we also have to understand that apart from future pandemics that could occur, and also what we're faced with is the accelerated digitalization of communication channels. And what I mean by that is that it's like all these different social media. By the time you master Instagram, TikTok turns up. By the time you master TikTok, something else turns out. When you're using WhatsApp, Signal, people start moving on to Signal and other messaging. So what's happening is people's behavior is shifting constantly from channel to channel. And what that means is you need to develop that sort of, cultivate that mindset of embracing change and being an early adopter of communications technology, so that you can understand where the audience is shifting. So my advice to you to thrive is to not think, oh God, we're almost coming out of the coronavirus, but to actually think, hold on, there's going to be more crisis and I want to be prepared for it. And I want to identify what are the specific issues in my industry and what are the specific things that could happen. And how am I going to build my contingency planning around it so that when it does happen, I'm less impacted? And how can I cultivate a early adopter mindset to learn about all these new channels that are out there? And really, I think for us to thrive in the future, we really do need to spend a lot more time and allocate half a day a week. I know it's difficult. We've all got a lot of responsibilities, but allocate at least half a day to learning. Just what we call in public relations, horizon scanning, looking across the horizon, not only in your company, not only in your sector, not only in the business world, but the wider public society. Immerse yourself, and then what you'll find from that half day that you spend every week horizon scanning, you will develop a much more sort of an agile framework and a better strategy moving ahead in the future. So change is here to stay, and actually there are many opportunities in crisis.